Southwest 3216 only tired, runway 24 right for last.
It's a beautiful morning here in Bakersfield, California. Welcome to the CAT-06 rating. This is the 6th rating in the VFR Communication and Airspace Training Series on the PilotEdge network. Today in the CAT-06, we'll be taking a flight from Bakersfield, California, over to Mojave, California. It's about a 50-mile flight, and it's going to be very much the same as the CAT-5 with two fairly significant exceptions. And the first one is that in the CAT-5, we picked up our flight following in the air. We talked to Santa Barbara Approach Control, we got flight following from them, and we proceeded on to Bakersfield. Well, today we're going to be picking up our flight following on the ground, which arguably is actually easier because when you do that, you don't have to worry about who to call in the air. All the frequencies are going to be given to you. You're going to have flight following directly from the ground. Now, the second thing that's going to be different is that if you see on the briefing page of the sectional chart here, we are going to be encountering restricted airspace and military airspace and MOAs. We'll talk all about that more in just a moment. As I recommend with every rating, please read through the textual portion of the briefing here on the CAT-06 page prior to watching this video. That'll put things in a little bit better perspective for you. So let's get the first things out of the way. Make sure you file your flight plan on the PilotEdge network. Select that you are performing the CAT-06 rating. Okay, so let's head over to skyvector.com. Check out our flight plan today. We've got Bakersfield to Mojave loaded up in here. The direct line shows 50 miles, and it actually follows this highway quite well. So I think that's what I'm going to be shooting for our navigation today, is just going along this highway. Along the way, we'll check out the Tehachapi Airport. That's TSP, and that'll be a good, well, let's measure it here. That'll be a good indicator. We're about 15 miles from the Mojave Airport when we get over the Tehachapi Airport. So before we get into all of this military airspace and you see all these different markings on the sectional, don't be afraid, don't be intimidated by those. We'll get to those in just a minute, but let's start with the basics. Let's just start over at Bakersfield and discuss our departure. Now, before we even do any of that, like I said, we're going to be picking up flight following on the ground. So all that means is that air traffic control is going to be inputting our flight plan into their system on the ground from the tower controller side versus from the TRACON or the center controller side in the radar room. So the controller in the tower will be inputting our flight plan information into the computer system that will then talk to departure control, center, and so on. This is contrary to the CAT-5 where we picked up our flight following in the air, and the radar controller and the TRACON at Santa Barbara Approach would enter in our flight plan information there. The computer knew nothing about us prior to that point with Santa Barbara Approach. However, today we're going to be letting Bakersfield Ground know that we want to pick up flight following over to Mojave, and they will put in our aircraft type and our destination. They'll give us a squawk code on the ground. We'll go over that in just a minute, and you'll see that all happen in real time. So as we get up and airborne, we will leave the Bakersfield class Delta, but that's not really going to matter that much today. And the reason behind that is because Bakersfield Tower is going to tell us to contact departure. This is part of flight following. We are going to receive a departure frequency. When we talk to ground control and we get our squawk code, they'll also give us a departure frequency. So Bakersfield Tower will tell us to contact departure. And in that case, the class Delta really doesn't mean anything to us because we will then be talking to Bakersfield Approach, and we'll still be in contact with the controller who wants to be talking to us. We're not going to be asking for a frequency change. We don't really need to worry about when we actually exit that class Delta airspace. It's going to be fairly irrelevant at that point. So we're going to continue southeastbound. We'll pick up that highway, and we're just going to track it down here. Okay, now at this point, look at this. We have military airspace, but don't be concerned. We're going to go over this right now. So this magenta hashed here, that is what is known as a MOA. And we go up here, Military Operations Area, MOA, MOA. This is the Bakersfield MOA. Now, as you can see on SkyVector, we are looking at the sectional chart, and I'm going to point out that I'm looking at the Los Angeles sectional chart here in the top right. Oftentimes you'll see me use the World VFR chart. The problem with that, well, it's actually great in that SkyVector blends every single chart together so you can zoom out and see everything, which is absolutely fantastic. However, the problem with that is that you can't see the edge of the chart. What I mean by that, if we go over here to the Los Angeles sectional chart, now I can zoom out and it actually looks like the chart you'd buy over at the Pilot store. So now we can look up at the very top of the chart, and I will tell you why that's important here in just a second. We're going to be looking for the Bakersfield MOA, and we are go to the top of the chart here, and we look for the Bakersfield MOA, which is going to be over here, and they're in alphabetical order, which makes it easy. So the Bakersfield MOA is active from 2,000 feet AGL above ground level, and it's intermittent by NOTAM. So it's only active when it's NOTAMed to be active. And the controlling facility is Los Angeles Center, and there's no frequency listed, at least up here. Okay, so that tells us that we basically need to check the NOTAMs or ask air traffic control if the Bakersfield MOA is hot or active today. Hot and active, they're used interchangeably with military airspace. So that's going to be our first MOA that we encounter, 2,000 AGL. Well, in this area, we're actually going to be cruising at 9,500 today. So we will certainly be above 2,000 AGL, which will put us directly in the MOA. Now that's okay. And I'll stop for a second and talk about the different types of military airspace. In fact, there's a really good briefing on that on the CAT-06 textual briefing, and I assume you already read that because of my suggestion. But it's about 3/4 of the way down the page. You'll see special use airspace. This includes prohibited areas, alert areas, warning areas, controlled firing areas or CFAs, and national security areas. So these are all different types of airspace that are not covered in the information above. So between the information above and those pieces of airspace that I just read off, you now know all about military airspace. So the airspace we're going to be dealing with today are military operating areas, MOAs, and sort of restricted airspace. We'll get to that in a minute. It's not necessarily going to impact our flight, but it's close enough to a route of flight that we should certainly know that it's there and how to handle it. So military operating areas, MOAs, are all below 18,000 feet. They don't go above 18, and we can actually fly through them as a VFR pilot without any sort of ATC clearance. However, it's not really recommended, and here's why. The MOA is there for a reason. There are oftentimes very high-powered and high-speed military aircraft operating within those areas, or there could just be some sort of other military activity going on in there. The military is using that airspace for a reason, and there's a reason that it is charted and in use. Now, this isn't necessarily official, but there are stories out there of the young military pilots in their F-18s and F-16s seeing a little VFR Cessna just chucking right through the MOA, and it's really fair game at that point. Now, that's not to say they're going to shoot you down. That's not to say that they're going to try and harm you in any way, but when you go through that MOA, you're kind of in their world at that point. And don't be surprised if they decide to have a little fun and buzz you and really scare the pants off you. That's why it's highly recommended that you either avoid an MOA or at least be in contact with air traffic control while you're going through it. At that point, ATC can give you any sort of advisories as to the aircraft around you. However, keep in mind that the military could be using some sort of radar jamming technology, or the airplanes might just be going so fast that the air traffic control's radar actually can't really keep up to give you sufficient traffic calls. So keep all that information in mind when you decide to trek through an active MOA. Again, I'm not discouraging it, and you're completely within your means to go through a MOA. I just want to make sure you are aware of what you're getting yourself into. Now, in our flight plan today, we really don't have an option. We have to go through the Bakersfield MOA. So normally in a real airplane, you would check the NOTAMs and see if it's hot. Today, we'll just go ahead and ask air traffic control as we get airborne. On the PilotEdge network, military airspace is generally assumed to be cold, although the controllers could obviously alter that at any time. So the Bakersfield MOA is just going to be this little sliver here. It's about a maybe 8 to 10 mile sliver that we're going to be going through. But then we actually have another MOA that we're going to hit, and that's denoted by this line here. And we can scroll out a little bit, and we'll see that is the Isabella MOA. The Isabella MOA, and that's going to be this larger MOA, and that's going to begin just prior to this airport here, and it's going to extend all the way to our destination. Now, some important things to note as well. This little note here, the MOA excludes airspace 4,800 feet MSL and below. That is specifically for Mojave Airport. So that means when we're 4,800 feet MSL and below, the MOA is not active within the Mojave area. But just like we did for the Bakersfield MOA, let's go learn a little bit about the Isabella MOA. So back up to the top right portion of the chart, and alphabetically we find Isabella. So 200 feet AGL is the altitude. Now there's a little star here, by the way. This star points over to this note that says all these altitudes indicate the floor of the MOA. So all MOAs extend up to and not including flight level 180. So that means that the 200 feet AGL is where it begins at the bottom, and it goes all the way up to and not including flight level 180. As far as the use times, 0600 to 2200 Monday through Friday, and it's covered by Joshua approach control on 133.65. So if you're flying your flight during those 0600 to 2200 Monday through Friday, it's likely going to be hot. However, there certainly are time periods within the charted time frame where it goes cold. So it's always worth asking your traffic control, if you are going to be going through there, what the status of the MOA is, hot or cold, active or inactive. So back down we go. You'll see that we're going to be traveling about maybe 20 to 30 miles through the Isabella MOA, and we will be receiving flight following. Remember, we're going to get flight following with all this. So we will be talking to the air traffic controller who is overseeing this piece of airspace, hopefully to give us any traffic calls. But it might not be a bad idea just to take an extra glance out the window every once in a while and just make sure that the military isn't having any fun with you out there. Lastly, we're going to discuss the restricted airspace, the restricted area out here. This is restricted area R2515, and this is around the Edwards Air Force Base. Now, we're actually not going to be encountering this restricted area, at least assuming everything goes well, we won't be. But like I said before, it's close enough to Mojave Airport that it's pertinent to our flight. We need to know it's there. Basically what this means is that if we overshoot Mojave for whatever reason, we are likely going to be hitting this restricted area. Now, we can take R2515 and reference it at the top here. This is going to be in the blue this time, R2515. And this is unlimited, which means this is down to the surface and up. You can see it's also in use continuously, covered by Joshua approach on these frequencies. So you can see there's really no room for error for overshooting the Mojave Airport. And if we do, for whatever reason, we need to peel off to the northeast or north almost immediately to make sure that we do not hit this restricted airspace. The restricted airspace is very different than a MOA, where a MOA we can fly through it even if we're not talking to any ATC whatsoever. Again, not advised, but legal. However, a restricted area is entirely different, where you need an ATC clearance to get through the restricted area, and unless you have a good reason, you're likely not going to get it. Okay, so that's it for the briefing on the flight plan and the airspace. I hope you've got a decent idea now of the difference between MOAs and restricted areas and what we can do in a MOA and what it all means to fly through a MOA. Again, it's also really important that you understand the other pieces of airspace. You can also check out the link in the top right of the video. That'll talk all about restricted airspace and other airspaces that the military uses in one of the PilotEdge workshop videos that Keith Smith put on several years back. So let's begin our cockpit setup for today. We're going to go back into our charts, and we're going to pull up the Bakersfield Airport diagram. Today we're parked over here kind of near the U.S. Customs ramp, and we will be tuning the ATIS to start. That's 118.6. We've got real world weather in the sim today. So let's begin with that, and we'll get the ATIS. Okay, I just picked up the ATIS, and as I mentioned in the previous videos, I'm going to start shortening these videos a little bit as we do things we've already done. We picked up the ATIS many times in previous videos. If you'd like a review, go ahead and go check out the CAT-2 rating on that. But as far as today's ATIS goes, they are information Bravo, and they are using runway 30 left and right. So we can expect probably runway 30 right here, since like I said, we're over at the U.S. Customs ramp. So let's discuss the next step, and that's going to be tuning Bakersfield ground. Now, we're going to be picking up flight following on the ground today, if you recall. And whenever you do this, you're actually going to tune to either the clearance delivery frequency, if there is one, or ground if there isn't one. Now, as you can see here on the chart, there is no clearance delivery frequency. Now, I've got the Van Nuys Airport chart ready just to show you what it would look like if there was clearance. You'd see CLNC Del, clearance delivery 126.6. That's over at Van Nuys. Since there's no clearance delivery frequency listed for Bakersfield, we know that they are just combined on ground, so that's who we're going to call. However, if there was a clearance delivery frequency and you wanted to pick up flight following, you would do that on the clearance delivery frequency. Okay, ground is set on 121.7. Now when we're calling ground, because clearance delivery is combined up on the ground control frequency for that airport's configuration, we can just go ahead and make our taxi request at the same time as our flight following request. The only thing you have to remember as a pilot is you're going to get more information back, so you better be ready with a pen and paper in hand. You're going to get your taxi instructions along with likely a departure frequency and a squawk code, maybe even some departure instructions. So while you always want to be ready to write with that pen and paper, it's going to be all the more important here when you get all those instructions at once. Now before I call up, there's one more piece of information I'll tell you that's really important, and that's that at some airports, usually the smaller airports, they do not have the capability to give you flight following from the ground. This is solely due to the lack of equipment that the air traffic controllers have on the tower. Essentially, they are a strict VFR tower. What that means is they don't have a computer up there. All their information is done over the phone with a pen and paper. They don't have a way to put your information into the computer. So they're just going to tell you a frequency to contact on departure where you can pick up your flight following. Very similar to the CAT-5. But it'll typically just be your smaller and less busy airports that you'll encounter that. And from a pilot's perspective, unless you've been there before, there's no way for you to know this. So don't feel bad if ground control comes back and says we cannot issue you flight following. It's nothing personal. It's just a lack of equipment on their side. Okay, we're tuned to 121.7. We're just about ready to call ground. Now, just to review, just because we're about to call for flight following, remember, we're going to call for flight following and our taxi at the same time. We're going to combine all to one. Just because we're going to call for flight following doesn't mean that our normal cadence and our normal format of how we call changes. So it's going to be who we're calling, who we are, where we are, our requests, and the ATIS code. And we're just going to lump that whole taxi and flight following request into our request. And you'll hear that right now. Bakersfield ground, bearing 210 Pop Echo at the U.S. Customs ramp. Request flight following at 9,500 to Mojave Airport with information Bravo. This is for the CAT-06 rating.
Bearing 210 Papa Echo, Bakersfield ground, thanks for Bravo. Bakersfield departure frequency 118.8, squawk 0205.
118.8, 0205 for bearing 0 Pop Echo.
November 0 Papa Echo, you read back correct, and you're ready to taxi now, is that correct?
Affirmative, bearing 0 Pop Echo from the U.S. Customs ramp.
Bearing 0 Papa Echo, runway 30 right, taxi via Alpha, Bravo.
Runway 30 right, yeah, Alpha Bravo, 0 Pop Echo. Okay, so as you heard in the call for flight following, there were a few subcategories that we need to include for that flight following. And that was basically all the information the ATC needs. That's our aircraft type, and our destination, and our cruise altitude.
Santa Barbara Tower, Aero 902.
Now, there are a few other ways you can tell the tower, or any controller for that matter, what type of aircraft you are, and that's in your call sign and abbreviating your call sign. We'll talk a little bit about abbreviated call signs as we get airborne here, and we trek down to the southeast to Mojave. Okay, I've switched to the tower on 118.1, and I'm now going to put in the 118.8 departure frequency. That was the frequency we were given from ground control for our departure frequency. Now, do not switch to that yet. And you will not switch to that until you're told to do so. Remember, we only switched to tower now on 18.1. That was from ground to tower. We know that switch is whenever we are ready for takeoff. The switch from tower to departure is on tower's instruction. Bakersfield Tower, bearing 210 Papa Echo, holding shoulder, runway 30 right, ready for takeoff.
210 Papa Echo, Bakersfield Tower, runway 30 right, clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, runway 30 right, bearing 0 Papa Echo.
47406,
Cross
Apples at 8,000, cleared a ILS, the runway 17 approach.
Tower bearing 0 Papa Echo, verify we're cleared on course.
Say again, 210 Papa Echo, you can proceed on course and contact departure.
On course, switching departure, bearing 0 Papa Echo. Okay, so the reason I asked if we're okay to turn on course is just because we didn't get any sort of pattern exit instructions, no sort of departure instructions. So I just want to make sure that it was okay for us to begin our right turn out to Mojave. So we are going to switch over to our departure frequency that was already queued up in our standby. And this is a call that we're just going to make our call with our altitude. The radar controller knows we're coming because we're already in the system. So it's really just a check on. Bakersfield departure, bearing 210 Pop Echo, 2,800.
210 Papa Echo, Bakersfield departure, radar contact.
And we heard that radar contact. We talked about what that meant back in the CAT-5 video. So at this point, the controller is watching us on the radar, and the reason that we give our altitude is because the controller has to verify our mode C is accurate with what they are seeing. So we're going to trek down to the southeast, pick up that highway, and get going over to Mojave. Now, I said we would talk a little about call signs, and this is something we haven't talked about in any of the CAT ratings yet. But it's important to know about what you can shorten your call sign to. You sometimes hear me say bearing 0 Pop Echo. You might hear me say November 0 Pop Echo. So every time you check on with a new controller, you have to use your full call sign. That's November 210 Pop Echo, or we could use Baron 210 Pop Echo, or Beach 210 Pop Echo. Essentially anything that's make or model or the November followed by the full call sign constitutes as a full call sign call. However, after that in subsequent calls, we can abbreviate our call sign to Beach 0 Papa Echo, or Baron 0 Papa Echo, or November 0 Papa Echo. Now the one thing you don't want to do is say both things. For instance, you don't want to say November Baron 210 Papa Echo or Baron November 210 Papa Echo. That's incredibly repetitive and it's not necessary. So you want to try to use one of those, and you can actually really save a lot of time by just saying Baron 0 Papa Echo. Now, admittedly, I'm guilty of just saying 0 Papa Echo at times, and that is in no way legal. And you'll hear pilots do that, and you shouldn't get in that habit. And so try and get out of that habit. I will try to break myself out of that habit as well. It should be Baron 0 Papa Echo, November 0 Papa Echo, or Beach 0 Papa Echo. Maker, model, or November, and the last three of your call sign. And that's every call. You can do that except the initial call to a new controller. But like I said, you never want to be caught saying Beach November or Baron November. That becomes repetitive. You can just say Baron 210 Papa Echo, and then that will tell the controller that your full call sign, and at the same time tells them your type aircraft.
Baron 210 Papa Echo, contact Josh, approach 124.55, how you going?
124.55, Baron 0 Papa Echo, thanks. Okay, so we're getting handed off to Joshua approach now, 124.55, that's now set in our active. And this is just another simple call for a checkout. We're just giving them our altitude. Joshua approach, Baron 210 Papa Echo, 4,300.
Baron 210 Papa Echo, Josh approach, Mojave altimeter 3017.
3017, thanks, 0 Papa Echo. I did it again. I didn't include my my type, but again, that is a bad habit. I will try to break it. It should have been Baron 0 Papa Echo. But as you noticed in the initial call, I included Baron 210 Papa Echo, and that is correct for that initial call. Okay, so the first MOA that we're going to be approaching is the Bakersfield MOA. That is this slanted line here, and we're going to be entering it right around here. So on the ground, I mentioned we would be talking to ATC and asking them if the Bakersfield MOA was hot or cold, and I'm going to go ahead and not do that today just because PilotEdge doesn't really simulate the military airspaces. That doesn't mean that you should just plow through them without any thought, but we're already receiving flight following, and even without it, we could go through the MOA regardless. So we'll just keep an extra eye out, just make sure that there's no other aircraft that are buzzing us or just doing anything unusual within the MOA. So we'll just keep an extra eye out. If we wanted to, we could ask ATC if it was hot. I'm just going to choose not to just because there's no reason. It's really just a little bit of extra information that we could be aware of. So as we make our climb up, and there's not a whole lot to do here between Bakersfield and Mojave, let's begin discussing our arrival into Mojave. So let's bring up the chart again. And we're coming from the northwest, and bring up the airport diagram here. I have not picked up the weather yet, but I'll do that shortly, so we'll know which runway to expect. And there's not a whole lot of parking here, so we'll just park over here at the admin building or the hangar here just off of taxiway Charlie. And we'll come back to this and plan our taxi in once we figure out what the active runway is. Now, one other thing I'll point out while we are here, we're going to be coming in from the northwest, like I said. 4,800 and below is the Class Delta airspace. Now, just because we're getting flight following doesn't necessarily mean that we can just plow right through into the Class Delta airspace. And this is actually a little bit of a controversial topic. You'll find a lot of different information on this on the internet, but the requirements to enter a Class Delta airspace are to establish two-way radio communications with the tower. We've talked about this in previous ratings, specifically the CAT-2 and 3. Now, before doing that, we obviously need to get a handoff to the tower. We're not just going to switch off the Joshua approach control frequency on our own. We're not going to use COM2 to switch over to Joshua approach. And we're just not going to, we need to tell Joshua approach what we're doing. We can't just do something because we're talking to Joshua approach. We can't just go off and do our own thing. Every time you leave the frequency, you need to get permission to do so. So once we get about 10 to 15 miles from Mojave, we can expect to maybe start to hear a contact Mojave tower. If we get between maybe 5 and 8 miles from Mojave Airport and we have not gotten the switchover, we're probably going to ping Joshua approach and we'll say, hey, we've got Mojave Airport in sight, request frequency change. At that point, they will likely terminate our radar service. They'll probably give us a VFR beacon code 1200 and they'll tell us to contact Mojave Tower. At that point, we are just a regular VFR inbound arrival. We do not have any sort of priority to violate or penetrate the Class Delta airspace. Nothing like that. We have to still stay out of the Delta until we are talking to Mojave Tower. And you'll find a video that PilotEdge did about that very topic at the top right of the screen right now. You can click on that when you're ready. Now that video actually talks about transitioning class deltas, not so much arriving, but it's the same exact concept, is that ATC will likely do the work for you if you're transitioning. However, if for an arrival, they really have no reason to do the work for you. So don't count on them to coordinate your approval into the class delta airspace. You're going to have to get that on your own. We would usually be getting the ATIS right now, but guess what? There is no ATIS from Mojave. We look on the chart here, and we look at the frequencies, and it's only an AWAS. So it doesn't really change much other than the fact that we're not going to really get an active runway from the AWAS. The AWAS is just an automated broadcast, and the tower doesn't input any audio into that. It's just strictly weather. So we are going to pick up the AWAS though, but that's not going to tell us any sort of runway information. So it's not going to help us as far as developing our taxi plan, but hopefully with the weather information we can determine what the runway in use is going to be. So the AWAS is a 132.55, and depending on your simulator, you may or may not get this on PilotEdge, because the PilotEdge does not put out the AWAS or ASOS. PilotEdge only puts out an ATIS. So the AWAS or ASOS is going to be through your simulator itself, and if you're not hearing it, that's a problem with your specific simulator. That's not a problem with PilotEdge, because PilotEdge does not inject any sort of AWAS or ASOS like they do for the ATIS. So in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, I'm not picking up any sort of ASOS, so that's kind of just a waste. So we're going to swap back to guard 121.5. But what we can do is bring the chart back up, and we're going to get the METAR from Mojave by just hovering over this little green dot. I've got my weather bubbles up. 060 at 6 is the wind. 9 mile viz, clear skies, altimeter 3017. So we can expect most likely a straight in to runway 8. Oh, 127.6, and we'll squawk VFR, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Okay, well, we just got the frequency change, so 127.6, we're going to put that in. Mojave Tower, Baron 210 Pop Echo, over the windmill, 7,700, inbound with the numbers.
210 Pop Echo, Mojave Tower, enter left down runway 26, report midfield.
Enter left down runway 26, report midfield, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Okay, well, they are still using runway 26 despite the minor tailwinds, that's no problem. Okay, so real quick, we'll develop our taxi plan since we now know our runway, and we're landing on runway 26. So we'll plan maybe a echo turnoff out and straight in. So that'll be nice and easy. We'll get ground ready on the standby 123.9er.
0 Pop Echo, runway 26, clear land.
Clear land runway 26, Baron 0 Pop Echo.
DCSS flighting 180.
180, Delta Echo Charlie, south.
Clear the hold bars, and we'll come to a stop. We'll wait further instructions.
0 Pop Echo, taxi to parking via Charlie, monitor ground.
Taxi to parking via Charlie, monitor ground, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Alright, we will taxi to parking and monitor ground. Remember, that just means switch over and do not call.
Alright, thank you. 2 Papa.
So now we're monitoring the ground frequency just in case they need to get a hold of us. We are on the right place for them to do that. Remember, we still do not have our rating result yet, so we will query the controller for that if we don't get it here in the next 30 seconds or so. Mojave ground, Baron 0 Pop Echo, looking for a result for the CAT-06.
0 Pop Echo, pass for the CAT-06.
0 Pop Echo, thanks. All right, another successful CAT rating. We've passed the CAT-6, and we'll see you next time for the CAT-7. That's going to be a Class Charlie transition. We've dealt all within Class Delta, Echo, and Golf airspace, but now we're going to start dealing with Class Charlie airspace. That'll be next. We'll see you then.